how the director's performance is perceived and seen by the chair and by other officers. At that point, that's the intention is to have a common understanding between the officers and the director about how the commission is working and how the director is performing in their job of managing that office. Later on, at some point, if there is a merit increase provided in the LCC salary plan, the chair will make that determination of the amount that the director is eligible to receive. That's a quick overview of our process in the joint offices. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. Any questions? Representative Liebling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, are these directors who are being evaluated, do they have 6-year terms like what we're talking about here, or are there different lengths of term?
Mr. Hubinger?
Mr. Chair and Representative Liebling, there are only 2 positions that have appointed terms, the legislative auditor and the director of the Legislative Budget Office. All of the other directors are at-will employees like most legislative staff.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. Representative Hansen?
Thank you. And Mr. Hubinger, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hubinger, the Legislative Budget Office is new, so have there been any policies or procedures written for reviews or performance with that 6-year term, or was that just modeled on the audit?
Mr. Hubinger?
Mr. Chair and Representative Hansen, I understand that the director of that commission or that office is following the process that's been laid out here, where she has she's in the process of writing up a summary of her work for the last year and is submitting that to the chair. I don't know about how the rest of that process is going to play out.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. Representative Hansen, follow. Senator Rest?
Mr. Chairman, so the legislative auditor is appointed and, well, elected by this commission. The legislative budget officer, and maybe you mentioned this, I just missed it, how does that appointment come about, and is that one that allows for removal for cause within the term that they have, and so forth?
Mr. Hubinger?
Mr. Chair and Senator Rest, the director of the Legislative Budget Office is appointed by the Legislative Budget Oversight Commission. I believe they can only be removed for cause within that 6-year term. I haven't reviewed that statute recently, but I believe that's the outline.
So, Mr. Chairman, so
Senator
that
Rest.
is also, they are elected by that commission. A majority of members of that commission secures the appointment of that person for a 6-year term.
Mr.
Chair,
Chair, Senator Rest, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Just checking.
Senator Rest?
No, I'm
Okay.
fine. I just wanted to make sure.
Mr. Hubinger, is anybody else on your organization have any information to present to us? And who would like to go next?
I'm going to go next.
Mr. McCormick?
Members, Pat McCormick, House Research Director. House Research Director is appointed by the Speaker and Minority Leader, and I was appointed by Matt Tenza and Steve Svigum in 2005. I've been evaluated every year, so it's an annual evaluation, and they haven't skipped a year since I've been there. In fact, in the House, no employee may be given any salary increase unless they've had an annual evaluation. So when my staff comes in and say, why do we have to do this? I say, you don't have to do this. You just don't have to have a salary increase this year. And they always want to have their evaluation. The evaluations are conducted by either the Speaker or the Chief of Staff, or the Speaker and the Chief of Staff. And it varies. It's usually every other year the Speaker evaluates me, and then the next year the Chief of Staff does the evaluation, and that's how it's always been done. I complete an essay. The essay varies because they can give you a slightly different assignment in any given year, but generally it has 4 parts. First is personal. What did I do my last year, and what am I gonna? Second part is what am I gonna do the next year personally for development or challenges that I'm facing. And then the third and fourth parts are for the office. What has the office done in the last year, and what challenges have they faced, and what challenges do I see in the next year for the office? And that's about it varies from a 2 to 4 page essay, depending on how wordy I want to get. Like some years they've done outreach. In my initial years, they would talk to senior people who are in-house research, and they would talk to other members, and the outreach varies by who the speaker and chief of staff are. And then we have a meeting. The meeting is also required. You can't get a raise if you don't have the meeting. And at the meeting, it's a venue. I think the meetings are a good venue. They give the speaker, they give the chief of staff a venue to bring up issues that they wondered about, or things that slightly rankled them. Or occasionally I've been given orders that are completely legitimate, but it's like, you will do this. And I'm like, absolutely, it's within the range of what you can order me to do, I'll do it. But in general, it's just a conversation where they ask, how are things going? What are your challenges? Is there something special that your office needs? And then we end up with a form that is signed that gives me a rating, and that goes down to the personnel office and allows me to get a raise.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Any questions for Mr. McCormick? Representative Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McCormick, and maybe this is either you or Mr. Hubinger, what about some of the other, like the Legislative Reference Library or the chief clerk, or some of those positions? The reviser. Could you maybe describe how they are reviewed?
Mr. Hubinger?
Mr. Chair and Representative Hanson, the Director of the Reference Library and the Reviser of Statutes are both evaluated by the LCC Chair, and then use that process that I described earlier.
And members, the chief clerk is
Mr. McCormick.
evaluated in exactly the same way. I mean, all the department heads in the House go through the same evaluation that I outlined.
Senator Rest?
So then is there a document that is produced that is put in their personnel files?
Mr. McCormick?
Remember, in the House, the one-page summative document goes into the personnel file, and that has a grid which the evaluator fills out, and it ranges from needs poor performance, needs improvement, to excellent performance, to superior. They check that box. They fill out. The form also requires them to note the date and time at which I was evaluated, and that goes into the file. The actual essay I write, I have no idea what happens to that. In my office, when I do a similar performance for my folks, the essay stays in my office in a personnel file, just in my office.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Senator Rest, follow-up?
So is your essay shared with and acknowledged by the employee?
Mr. McCormick?
My essay is basically in the hands of the speaker and chief of staff, and they can do with it as they will.
Mr.
Senator Rest?
Chairman? So the employee has no idea what you said about them?
No,
Mr.
yes,
McCormick.
sorry. In our office, let's say that I'm evaluating a member of my staff. We do a slightly different version of it. I have a longer form which I give to the employee. They fill that form out, answering a series of questions. Their coordinator and I write a response. We have the meeting, and then the employee writes a follow-up paragraph or two, and then that goes into the file. That allows us to have the employee's view of their performance, our management response outlining, we agree with this, we would like you to spend more time with this, one issue we have is this. Then the meeting is informed by both their essay and our response, and then they're assigned at the end of the meeting to come back and say, as a follow-up, I was ordered to spend time this summer studying transportation funding and creating a short subject on transportation funding in the following way. I was asked to attend an NCSL training seminar. whatever came out of that meeting, that goes in the final essay, and then I sign it, the coordinator signs it, the staff member signs it, it goes into their personnel file in my office, and then the one-page summative form goes downstairs to the personnel office for the whole house.
Senator Rest? Good.
Do you mind if I just keep on going?
Senator Rest?
Okay, thank you. So the staff that works for members, and the reason why I'm pursuing this a little bit is that the Senate, as Mr. Botter knows, is adopting a new performance appraisal system, and we just, in the Rules Committee, gave a series of, and Senator Benson, you can correct my memory here, but we gave a series of increases to salaries that were that became part of the base. But we also, starting October 1st, started a merit pay increase program, which we used to have, and Mr. Bowden can correct me on this, we used to have, and then it became meaningless because almost all supervisors, and in the Senate, on the DFL side, we're all supervisors. On the Republican side, they have a different system of supervising their legislative assistants and their, but that's not so on the DFL side. But we are now charged with, if you didn't take the training by our personnel director, your employee is not going to be eligible to be considered for the merit raise. So that was kind of it was a big stick because people didn't want to take another 2 hours or 3 hours to come and learn about new systems and expectations and so forth. Does anything like that go on in the House? What is the relationship between members and the evaluation of their LAs? And I understand that in the House, there are more than one LA. No, an LA has more than one, at least two members that they answer to in terms of their daily work. So what happens if one is pleased and the other one is not?
Mr. McCormick?
Where does that all go?
Mr. McCormick?
Madam Chair, each caucus and each department has a supervisor of LAs, and they conduct the evaluation with input from the members, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm accurate, but I think that's how it's done on the partisan side. So, for example, the supervisor of LAs for the Republican caucus in the House will conduct the evaluations of all of the LAs in that caucus
That's like in the Senate.
with input from the members. So if two members have input on an LA and one says they're terrible and the other says they're accurate, it's the job of that supervisor to figure out what's going on and to parse the situation and then to complete the evaluation. And that necessarily might mean that one of the two members will be unhappy, and a smart supervisor will figure out why and try to figure out if that is that an issue with the employee, with the member, should we move this person around? But in the end, the evaluation is conducted by that staff or the supervisor of LAs.
Thank you, Ms. McCormick. Senator Rest?
Mr. Chairman, just a comment too, then. With this new system of performance appraisals being, first of all, training by for the supervisor, and then a performance appraisal being required before the employee next May or June, whenever it is, Senator Benson, it can be considered for a raise. There are some members in my caucus that don't like that system. They think it will once again become just pro forma. I'm not sure how I come down on it, but I think if it's going to happen, it has to be meaningful. And so since I am the supervisor of my LA, I require him to submit a activity report prior to my signing off on his paycheck for that period. And so that's on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, and I wait for his activity report, and when I get that, no matter when it is, then I'll okay and look at and approve his timesheet. I don't know if that's going to be, in the end, a better accountability both for my LA and for me, or if we're going to find that it's just another automatic pay increase. I think the jury is out on that, Senator Coran and Senator Benson, but somehow there has to be, even in the nonpartisan staff, there has to be ongoing evaluation, it seems to me. Formal, informal, whatever, rather than go along to get along. So any response to that?
Anybody field the question in the comments?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rest, it might
Mr.
be
Bowden?
helpful if I give you a little more detail about the Senate plan.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Bonner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in June of this year, the Senate Rules Committee adopted a resolution, as Senator Rest referred to, that imposed a deadline on the Director of Human Resources for the Senate to prepare a plan for annual performance evaluations and for merit increases. And the deadline is October 1st. The evaluation period will run from October 1st through June 30th of next year. Then there is a subsequent deadline, and I don't have that at my fingertips here, for completion of the performance appraisals, making any merit increase retroactive to July 1st of 2020, based on that performance appraisal. I believe it's the end of August, but it's escaping me at the moment. The Senate Director of Human Resources prepared several documents. These are available on the Senate intranet. If the Executive Committee has interest, I can make them available at a later time. I didn't want to swamp you with paper. The cornerstone for the entire process is the performance appraisal plan, as I alluded to earlier. That has the components that you would expect. There's a self-appraisal piece, then there's a written appraisal, and a requirement that the employee meet with the supervisor, and this would apply to supervisors as well. I'll try to speak to those components, since I think that's what the Executive Committee is considering here, how supervisors should be evaluated. Then there is, I'll just point this out, there's a right of appeal from items that are in dispute in the performance appraisal. The Human Resources Director basically has jurisdiction over that component.
Okay.
There are the actual documents. The self-assessment is fairly brief, and that's optional within the plan, but there are a lot of good reasons, I would say, for most supervisors to ask to see one, and for those who are evaluating supervisors to review that. And then there's a performance appraisal plan that's also available on the internet. The document that I want to speak to a little bit is a longer document. I think it's about 9 pages in length, and it's called the Performance Appraisal Competency Measures Guidebook. There was a working group put together that worked pretty extensively on this. I think there were something like 7 or 8 meetings of 3 hours in length each over the course of the summer to develop this guidebook in particular. It provides a lot of guidance for how to complete the appraisals. There are several pages related to the evaluation of supervisors, and the additional components that supervisors are evaluated on include leadership, decision-making, staff development, direction, and department oversight. And I'm going through all of this very briefly, but I think it's important to understand the different components. The training provided for supervisors spoke a little bit to how data are collected for the purposes of evaluating supervisors. And in many instances, for those who are evaluating supervisors, the training recognized it's important to speak to those they deliver the services to their staff and so forth. It's a more holistic approach perhaps than supervisors evaluating employees within their own department. That is a very brief run-through of what the Senate plan looks like and how it will be implemented. If you have more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Senator Rest?
When a supervisor is a member of the Senate, they're not evaluated, are they?
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Bowden?
Senator Rest, that's correct. I think they answer
Okay,
it
just wanna-
at the polls.
Right, okay.
Senator Rest, aren't we evaluated every 4 years?
Well, there was some discussion, at least when the group I was with had that training about whether the reports needed to go to a staff member, like the DFL chief of staff. And the members, of the DFL caucus said, no, that's not the way that's going to happen. So if that was part of that train, that will not happen in the DFL caucus. I just bringing that up.
Mr. Bowden?
Mr. Chairman, and this might be a tangent, but one component that I didn't describe in detail is there's a requirement for the supervisor to present the expectations for the person in that role. There is an opportunity there for the person who's being evaluated to seek to clarify what those expectations are. So there's some dialogue there. I don't know, call it an evaluation of a senator, but
Right. Don't call it that.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. Representative Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and maybe this is for all three of you. So we're in the legislative branch, and, we go through the budget cycle. We've been talking in the last few minutes about salary adjustments based on performance reviews. And I think, Mr. McCormick, you referenced that there were adjustments made this year, maybe with the budget, or maybe the Senate as well, that there was a different bump, I guess, given this year based on the budget. So my question is, who is affected by that? Because in the legislative branch, we're not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are people who are not covered by bargaining units in most cases. So if there was an adjustment for House of Representatives legislative staff, did that scale change? If the scale changed, and I guess I want to be clear, there's two different things I'm talking about, scale and then adjustments. Does scale and adjustments change for the commissions, like LCCMR, LSOHC, LCC, reviser, the nonpartisan staff? Just how are we collectively affected with the employees when are just some people, some units affected, or is it across the board?
Mr. McCormick?
For the House, we this year conducted a salary study with assistance of the NCSL and adjusted all the salary grids for all the different kinds of House employees. Most years we don't do that. Most years we live within the salary grids. So this year we changed the salary grids, which affects every different job classification somewhat differently according to the NCSL recommendations. In addition, we've adopted both a COLA and a merit-based component. So it's possible that this year, maybe somewhat uniquely, a person can have a change because of their change in the grid, a change because they get the COLA, and then a change because they get all or some or none of the merit raise. And so we've gone through all of those in the last 6 months and are in the process of implementing the merit raise part of the trifecta. Many years we've had just a merit raise. Some years we had just a COLA raise. Some years, of course, many years we had no raises and been frozen. And so it differs year to year by the state budget, by the legislative budget.
Mr. Hubinger?
Chair and members, the LCC and the Senate both also participated in the salary study that was conducted by NCSL. Our ranges weren't as dramatically impacted as the House ranges were, but we implemented those changes as part of a salary plan that was approved by LCC leadership. And that plan adjusted our ranges in some ways similar to what the House and Senate have done, but it also implemented salary increases that consisted of both across-the-board increases and merit increases. Our increases reflect the average of what the House and the Senate implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. Representative Hanson?
Thank you. And then did those adjustments, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Nobles, but did that NCSL evaluation on legislative branch positions then apply to the legislative audit staff where those salaries were adjusted?
Mr. Chair and Representative Hanson, the salary plan and the study included all of the joint offices and commissions, so it included LCCMR, as you mentioned earlier, but also the legislative auditor and revising statutes in the library.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. I think with that, I think we'd like to bring Mr. Nobles up. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Mr. Chairman.
Welcome,
members,
Mr. Nobles.
Is it okay if I bring some friends?
We're very welcome.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Executive Subcommittee, thank you very much. I think this is a good turn of events for us to formalize some of these practices into maybe some written policies. So I think it's a very good process. Let me just make some opening remarks. Obviously, within the Office of the Legislative Auditor, performance is extremely important. We have a little over 60 people, and I always say to each person on their first day in the office, you matter, because you are going to go out and you are going to gather information and maybe even write some material that is going to end up in a report and reflect on this office. So there is no one in this office who doesn't have some impact on the final product that we deliver. And that ultimately is, I think, what we are judged by. That is what we deliver, and our goal in the delivery of every report is that it's accurate, objective, timely, and useful. And I think we hit the mark on accurate. I hope we hit the mark on objective. I know sometimes our biggest struggle is on timeliness, and we work on that a lot. That's one of our biggest challenges. And so we have various mechanisms within the office for performance reviews, both informal, day-to-day, week-to-week, but also more formal as well. I must say, I really am a great proponent that performance reviews need to be ongoing. They need to be meaningful, and they need to be not just a formal pro forma process. And so I think both for the two deputies, Judy and Chris, and myself, we are all there together, and we all know what each other is working on. And so we need to interact. I need to interact with them on an almost literally daily basis. They need to interact with their managers on how things are going with their projects. Now, I think you are here to talk about how we interact with you and how you formalize a process for evaluating us. And that's been more informal, I would say, and so I think your attempt to formalize that more is a good idea. I've been here a long time. There's been various mechanisms of talking to me about how well the office is performing, how well I'm performing as the legislative auditor. Sometimes that has been that I will write a memorandum of self-assessment, meet with the chair. But again, I think a lot of that has been more on an ongoing basis, not a fixed point in time where we do a performance review. It's when I've gone into your offices and we have talked about how things are going. And it could be about a specific report, a particular assignment, our budget, staffing, whatever it is. But I think it's a good idea to have also within that ongoing performance review process a mechanism where we formalize it, and that is going to obviously be up to you as to how you want that to proceed. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Also, we could have the two deputies talk to you more about how we work internally. One thing that is different about the Office of the Legislative Auditor than any of the other offices that you're going to be dealing with and you've heard from. When the Office of the Legislative Auditor was created back in 1973, it was basically to move executive employees into the legislative branch. You brought employees from the Public Examiner's Office, and they were classified civil servants, and you brought them into the legislative branch, and the decision then was to keep them in the civil service. And so we, unlike other legislative offices, we really work within, for our employees, not for us, but for our employees within the civil service system. So we hire people within the civil service system, and they are governed under two plans. One of them is called the Commissioner's Plan. It's established by the Commissioner of MMB. And then there's a managerial plan for people who are at a higher level of management. And so there are some aspects of how we operate in terms of performance reviews and salary adjustments that are a part of those two plans. And then there are 6 of us who are in the unclassified civil service and subject to the LCC, Legislative Coordinating Commission, and also a personnel plan that the legislature adopted, a salary plan that the legislature adopted specifically for the Office of the Legislative Auditor. So we're a little bit different in some of the others, but I think in terms of the 3 people you have sitting in front of you, we're in the unclassified service. We all serve terms. I'm appointed by the Legislative Audit Commission. I appoint the deputies, and you confirm that those appointments. And so you certainly have a need and a prerogative to periodically evaluate my performance or whoever is the legislative auditor, as well as however you want to approach the 2 deputies. So, Mr. Chairman, would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. Senator Rest, I think what we'd like to do is hear from Deputy Boozy and Randall, Ms. Randall, before we take questions. So who would like to go first, Mr. Boozy or Ms. Randall? Ms. Randall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Judy Randall. I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. I'm mostly here to listen and respond to your questions today. I'm happy to answer questions. I don't have prepared remarks for today, but I will just say that I'm really glad you're doing this. I think it's really important that we go out and we provide oversight of agencies all the time, and I think it's appropriate that somebody have oversight of us and kind of audit the auditors periodically. So I welcome these conversations, and I'm looking forward to working with you moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Randall. Mr. Boozy?
Mr. Chair, Commission members, I also would like to echo Ms. Randall's comments, and if there's anything that I can do to answer your questions about what we're doing to serve you, I'd be happy to do that. Since I started in this office about 18 months ago now, we've made some pretty substantial changes in the Financial Audit Division to better serve the legislature, to produce better reports that were more meaningful and more understandable, also to select topics that were more meaningful to policymakers as well. And we also had quite a few internal changes that we made as well. And in fact, internal performance management was one area that we spent a great deal of time on to make sure that we did a better job managing people internally. And I would be happy to answer any questions about our external face with you, or as well as some of the internal things we're doing as well to better manage the division.
Thank you, Mr. Boozy. Question? Senator Rest?
Other than the 6 of you, Mr. Nobles, are the other members of the department represented by labor?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Knowles.
Rest, no, they are not represented. They are covered under the managerial and commissioner plan, and there are a number of other employees in state government which are kind of
Similar.
exempt from the collective bargaining process, and that's why there is, in fact, a managerial plan and a commissioner's plan to cover those employees who are not represented.
And one
Senator
other
Rest?
question. I'm looking at the document that says Legislative Auditor Performance Evaluation Policy. It addresses the instance where the legislative auditor is seeking reappointment. I wonder if you have any general comments when we get to that time when you will not seek reappointment, or during the middle of an appointment, you decide that you would like to retire. Are there, and this is a really open-ended question, are there changes in that you would recommend to the LAC or to the legislature as a whole on the process that you think would improve it, or well, I guess improvement or just changes to make it more efficient? Should the term be the same? Would you recommend a longer term, a shorter term, maybe that would coincide with the governor's term, for example, although he or she wouldn't have any say-so about it? Would that make more sense? Or if you had to come up with a number of recommendations for change, I wonder if you've thought about that, and the other two of you as well. You're not going to live forever either. What would you say to us?
Senator, Mr. Nobles, before you answer, in the document Senator Rest is referring to as a performance evaluation policy, that's a draft of ideas. And just so everybody's clear, it's a draft of ideas, and I think your question's perfect. We just want to make sure everybody
Yes.
knows it's a draft of
Yeah,
ideas.
this is
and
not
that's
statutory.
Yep,
Clearly.
and it's exactly why we're
No,
here
not
today,
this.
to
Right.
to craft and to have the discussion so we can craft a set of rules and guidelines for those that follow us. So, Mr. Nobles, with that?
Mr. Chairman and members, I think it's something that you really do have to contemplate, as do I, because I echo Senator Rest's point. I probably won't live forever. And by one means or another, at some point, I will retire or be removed from office in some way. So you're going to face that situation. You potentially could have faced it with my decision not to seek a reappointment. But I did, for a variety of reasons, seek a reappointment. I think the 6-year term is good, Senator Rest. I think that it overlaps sometimes at various administrations. And so I think not to necessarily follow, even though obviously the governor would not have any role, I think sometimes there is a buildup of feeling that somehow we are being critical of the governor and that administration. And so I think the 6-year kind of helps us show that, well, maybe for the term of Tim Pawlenty, we were very critical, but then a new governor came in and we were just as critical. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there was that opportunity as well here. We were fairly critical, had a number of critical reports about things in the Dayton administration, and now we have the Walz administration. And I think that, I hope what you see is that we're doing the same thing. It doesn't really matter to us in terms of personality or politics who is the governor. It's our responsibility to find facts and lay them out as best we can. So on the 6-year term, I think it is important. I honestly believe, and I've said this a number of times, I probably wouldn't still be sitting here if that term didn't exist, because I know I've issued reports. The office has issued reports that members do not like, some strongly do not like, and there probably have been discussions that you've been a part of that maybe I wasn't, that maybe there was time for Mr. Nobles to leave because he was showing some bias towards being too critical of the Pawlenty administration. Actually, that was presented to me one time by some members who said, gosh, you certainly seem to be critical of the Plenty administration. And I just said, just wait and judge me to see if I'm, if the office has the same approach with another governor. So again, I think the 6-year term is good. I know when the office of the legislative budget office was being created, there was a lot of consideration of how to protect that official because of the same consideration of maybe issuing some fiscal notes that some members aren't going to like. And I think a lot of members really like the approach of the Legislative Audit Commission having a term for the legislative auditor. So I think that's very good. I have been reappointed, as Senator Rest and many of you know, a number of times, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there's never been a great issue of concern that has divided the commission on whether to reappoint me. You may have had some private discussions. You may have some private discussions this time as well, and there may be some members who don't want to vote for me. But in the past, there has been a unanimous vote, and so I don't think there has ever been kind of an issue under my tenure that rose to an occasion of a serious investigation or consideration of performance. That's always a possibility, though. It's a possibility on things that might go on internally within the office that could come to you. It might be issues that come to you because of concern about the quality of our work. There are many things that could come to you that would reflect on the performance of the legislative auditor and your need to consider whether or not it is a cause for termination or a cause not to reappoint. That hasn't happened during my tenure, but it could certainly happen. And so I think it's good to have a process that you lay out for how is that going to be handled. So I'm glad this time for my seeking of a reappointment that we're going to have, I think, a serious discussion. I look forward to that. I look forward to hearing any concerns that members have. And frankly, sometimes I think and I hope that we can also turn this into a discussion about what do you want our priorities to be? Because the legislative auditor works with a lot of discretion and a lot of authority, and that's important, that there's a lot of independence. But you need to be concerned, am I using that independence and discretion appropriately? Mm-hmm. And I think there could be a very legitimate discussion about that. I would hope in the end that you have enough confidence in the decisions that we've made, and I often make them with my colleagues, that you trust us with that discretion and that independence. Because frankly, if there comes a time when the legislative auditor has brought that into question, you need to get rid of that legislative auditor and retain the independence. If any legislative auditor ever misuses the discretion and independence, you should get rid of him or her, and you should retain the independence, because the independence is the foundation. And whether you agree or disagree with us in our reports, I hope you will always say that we need that office to have the credibility that comes with that independence. And then you make a decision on whether or not the legislative auditor has upheld that trust, that authority, and that discretion. So those are my initial thoughts, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. Representative Liebling?
Thank you,
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Chair, and I know that our time is kind of limited here, and I want to kind of move us to the things that are actually before us, which has to do more, I think, with the issue about reviews. And so I just wanted to ask, I have sort of a series of questions that are interlocking about what we do now, or what you do now in the office. So first of all, since we have Ms. Randall and Mr. Boozy, do you do formal reviews of your staff? And if so, how often do you do it?
Mr. Nobles.
Mr. Chair and Representative Liebling, we have a process for each of the deputies with their staff to do those reviews. I interact with the deputies literally on a daily basis. I give them feedback, I give them concerns, or I give them congratulations. I would say one of the areas I need to improve is on the more formal kind of annual review. That's easy enough to do. There are actually documents that I do have to file with our HR director because of what has been talked about before with the increases. But I would hope that Mr. Boozy and Ms. Randall would never be surprised if I went to a formal written annual review and said, oh, by the way, I have a lot of concerns that I haven't expressed to you. So I try to do that on an ongoing, daily, weekly basis.
Okay, well,
Representative Lieberman?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I didn't get a real answer to my question. I take it the answer is no, but that we don't do, you don't do, or the two of you don't do formal written reviews on your employees every year or at all? Ms. Randall?
Ms. Randall?
Mr. Chair, Representative Liebling, no, your assumption is incorrect. We, of course, do annual performance reviews of all of our staff. I do annual performance reviews of all the managers, the evaluation managers, and I meet with them weekly, of course, to check on their progress, but then I have performance meetings with them annually. The managers all do formal written evaluations of the non-managerial staff. I also write part of that annual review of them, and I meet individually with each staff person to discuss their review, and I try to have at least one or two additional meetings throughout the year with all staff to check in and just see how things are going. So no, we have formal written reviews of kind of everybody below us. I would say among us, we don't.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Representative
If I
Liebman?
may, thank you. And so I assume that Mr. Boozy would say something similar, that you're doing these, and you kind of answered my next question, Ms. Randall, which was whether you too get formal written reviews, and I take it that the answer to that is no. I mean, having heard that, yeah, there's some reviewing going on as you all work together, but there's no formal written review. And then my next question, and you can correct that if I'm misunderstanding that, but my question then to Mr. Nobles is, have you ever had a formal written review? And if so, when was the last time that happened from us, from the
Mr.
commission?
Nobles?
Mr. Chair, Representative Liebling, I've never had a formal written review from the Legislative Audit Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles and Representative, and that's exactly why we're here today, to discuss and have define a policy, so those that are in our positions and our roles in the future, because we're temporary, that we have some guidance and to formalize that process, because it is critical to the existence of the office. All the conversations up to this point about making sure that the nonpartisan nature of that office continues, and that's what this process should reflect. So I think the answer, of course, would be there's no process in place to define in any place today to have a formal review. So.
Right, and Mr. Chair, thank you for that. And I
Representative.
appreciate, I'm sorry. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that we're here today to talk about doing that. And I know I may have to leave a little bit early, but that's why reviewing this proposal, I think it's an excellent idea. I have some specific comments about it, but one of them would be that this refers to doing it every 6 years before having a 6-year term or another kind of term is an issue, I think, for another day and not for this body, because this is statutory. However, I wonder if, to me, everybody needs to be evaluated, everybody, in one form or another, and for their own use, if for no other reason. But certainly, with positions as important as these, that we are not doing our due diligence if we don't do that. Otherwise, what are we here for? That seems like a critical thing. So I'm very glad we're doing this. I would wonder whether once every 6 years is enough. I kind of don't think it is.
Representative, I would agree with you. I think the goals, as stated here, are just draft ideas, and I think everything we've heard has been an annual evaluation to coincide with the performance an increase in compensation. And so I think ultimately we'll end up going down that path of having those formal reviews and a process, but to get it defined so this body can operate in the future with a little bit more clarity. So we agree. Representative, any other follow-ups? Representative Liebling, any other follow-ups? Senator Klein?
Chairman. Just to comment on Mr. Noble's recent comments about the role of the office, and thank you very much for those. Mr. Nobles, I think you are the first legislative auditor, is that correct?
Mr.
Nobles?
Chairman, actually, most people think so. But no, the first legislative auditor was actually the public examiner. As I said, the legislature brought the public examiner into the legislative branch, and then there were two others, fairly short terms. So given the fact that I have been legislative auditor for 36 years, it's a reasonable assumption on your part.
Senator Klein?
Going with that reasonable assumption, I would say that in some ways you're sort of the George Washington of the office here, and we will come up with some committee recommendations about how to assess and maintain the integrity of the office going forward, and they will be fairly legalistic. But your comments were so inspiring, visionary, and trenchant that I would encourage you to leave us with, and leave the office with some sort of farewell address, if you will, describing the importance of the nonpartisan nature of the office and the reason that it serves Minnesotans so well to have that bipartisan. I think it is not only a risk, but an expectation that we will, in some point in the future, have a legislative auditor who is biased towards one party or the other, and we will need some sort of benchmark to call upon when that occurs. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nobles, any comment?
Well, it's a very important point, and you know, I periodically am asked to go and talk to various groups, Rotary clubs or university classes or whatever, and this is a point that often comes up. How does this office exist in this very political, partisan environment as a nonpartisan office where we are taking positions? I mean, I worked at House Research for 6 years before I came to the Office of Legislative Auditor, and it was very much a behind-the-scenes kind of role, and many people here know that. I didn't stand out front. I didn't sit at this table and take a position on an issue. As legislative auditor, I do. In fact, I think it's important that the legislative auditor do that, make judgments, present information to the public, the legislature, that sometimes is highly controversial. And so it is a position that needs someone who can navigate through the politics and remain nonpartisan. I think one of the important things about that is to respect the process that is here, to respect you as ultimately the policymakers, but to try and understand what is the role of a nonpartisan office in this very partisan environment, and what does the leader of that office have to do to maintain that credibility. Certainly, it is first and foremost in the reports that we issue, but it is also, frankly, in my personal life. I don't have a bumper sticker on my car. My wife does not have a bumper sticker on her car. I don't attend any political event. I will not vote in the presidential primary because that information could say to you or others what ballot I chose. And you will make a judgment about me, and then you will judge our reports on whether or not you think I'm a Democrat or Republican, and I don't want you to know that. I'm not even sure if I know that. So you have to pick somebody in these positions that accepts that it is not only what I say and do in front of you, it's what I say and do even in my private life. I don't come to rallies on the Capitol Mall. And I ask other people in our office not to do that either, because this is an environment in which everybody wants to put a label on somebody. And we have to be those people that you cannot put a label on other than we are nonpartisan. Because I know that when I issue a report that one of you may not like, if you think I'm being partisan, you may want to look at that rally I attended or that vote I took in a presidential primary to confirm the bias that you think is there. I want you to judge whether there's bias there just on the facts of the report and have no other reason to even be concerned or skeptical of any bias that I or anybody else in our office has introduced into one of our reports. So going forward, that is something you're going to have to consider when you make another choice for a legislative auditor. Can you find somebody who is really strongly committed to, first of all, understanding the environment and respecting the environment, respecting the partisanship that is here and why it is here, and what it achieves and accomplishes for our democracy, but also to say, I cannot be a part of that. I can be a part of something else that I think is also very important, very vital, and I think not only you, but the public wants that to be here, wanted that to be here on somebody to investigate what went wrong with the Suboxone issue or the CCAP issue or all the other issues that are very controversial and come before this legislature. So you need, the public needs, the executive branch needs. The executive branch often comes to us and says, we need somebody who has the credibility and the responsibility to be independent and nonpartisan to investigate this issue, and that's the office of the legislative auditor. So that needs to be retained, whoever sits in this chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. Senator, we've got Representative Hanson first, then Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I want to go to the draft policy that's in front of us and just explain where that came from. So that was from House Research staff drafting that up. And what I'd asked them to do is look at, there's kind of 2 points. There's the appointment, reappointment process for the 3, and the deputy, I've been doing deputy registrar stuff too long. The deputy auditors are coterminous with your term, and since both auditor deputies have come in during the last 6 years, their term ends and your term ends on November 17th. So it's my understanding, if we do not act as a commission on November 17th, the 3 of you are out of a job. So we have some, so I take responsibility for delaying time here because time got a hold of the calendar, and I wished we could have done this a little earlier. I'll take responsibility for not getting that done at this point. But so there's the question of the appointment or reappointment, and the idea was that the 360-degree review is something that should occur around appointment or reappointment. That's not going to happen. If we adopted this policy today, we're not going to have the time to do a 360-degree review properly. And a 360-degree review means you're talking with peers, people above you, people below you, in a formal method. The annual performance reviews, and Representative Leland, that's more at the bottom, that the idea would be sometime before the end of, or by the end of the fiscal year, that an annual performance review would be done, assuming reappointment occurs before November 17th. And that we would be adopting policies that would lead towards that, having that 360-degree at least once during the term of the office, but annual performance reviews would start by the end of the fiscal year, so we can get into that habit of doing that. And with the annual performance reviews, that would tie in between now and then on policy changes, and that maybe changes isn't the right word, but standard operating procedures being formalized with policy, and that getting to a budget process as well, that the commission actually looks at the budget and makes a recommendation to the executive and to the legislative branches beforehand, because we really haven't done that either. So during the next year, if we adopt that, now a way to get from right this moment to maybe the next week, where I think we're scheduled again on the 7th, is perhaps we get input on this, either both verbally or in writing, or we task the three gentlemen working with the audit staff on consultation on developing policy to bring back to us. You know, that there's, so you have House and Senate, nonpartisan, fleshing out this a little bit more with the audit staff. And that would be one suggestion I would maybe throw out.
Thank you, Representative Hansen. Senator Rest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was that was some of my questions about this, this document. Who wrote it? And I understand House Research wrote it. And now am I to understand that Senate Council was not consulted at all, and this is not a joint
Yeah.
document? That's my first question.
Senator Rest, yeah, it's the House, and so what we'd like to do now is have the Senate have a full review, especially based on all the information as presented today. The structure, we appear to have all the elements of structure in place in all of our various bodies. And then, to me, the only thing I'd add is to make sure that we coincide the annual review. You mentioned, you know, in the fall or prior to the legislative session, but I think it should coincide with whatever the compensation schedule or review for additional compensation or adjustments. I think it should be aligned to not so much
so Mr.
the budget
Chairman,
period piece, but.
So if this document is presented to
Senator
us,
Rest.
are we going to have a formal amendment process? If I, for example, don't think we should be using a slang term to refer to a full evaluation. 360 degrees may mean something to you, it means nothing to me. And if it's not going to be defined in this document, then I don't think it should be used, and I would offer an amendment to delete it and have something that is more straightforward and transparent. I think the purpose is great, it's admirable, but I do believe it needs some wordsmithing from all of us. And I think that we need to, when we talk about this assessment and what it is, I'd like to know who's going to write it. Is it going to be a staff function? Seems to me that's inappropriate. It should be written by us or one of us to taking on that responsibility. And I think it should be clear that in the 4th bullet point, that the results of this analysis that is done only by the chair and the vice chair, that there are 10 other people who may say, you are really on a line, this is not correct, we are either going to overrule your recommendation and or whether it's to reappoint or to release or not to consider for reappointment. I think that evaluation, because it is a chair and vice chair, and it means that there are a person from each body, and in general, our practice has been if the chair is a member of the majority in whatever body has it that year, that the vice chair, although it's not in the statutes, the vice chair is a member of the minority party in the other body. And I think that probably should be considered to be spelled out here, even though it's not in statute. And then I wonder if you would consider some sort of process, maybe not as lengthy as this, actually holding us accountable to it in statute, rather than the vagaries of whoever happens to sit on this commission, that in 2021, it's going to be a different group of 12 people. Are they going to change this just kind of not willy-nilly, but to suit themselves? Or is this something that we're going to be, we would propose to be accountable to in statute? And I don't have any answers to that. But I don't think it's just look at this and have a policy that we adopt as a commission that hasn't really been thoroughly vetted. I mean, this is the first time I've seen this document, so those are just some concerns I have, but I think it's a really great way to go.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Benson, you had a comment too?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of things. I looked at the agenda for next time, and it appears that this issue is in front of the vote. I just want to be clear that settling this issue is not in any way linked or related to having a vote at our November 15th
Right.
meeting. Okay,
It's
thank you.
forward-looking, is what you're saying.
I want to make sure that we don't get wrapped up in, we have to tick and tie this document before we're going to take a vote on the appointments. Want that agreed upon publicly. Thank you to both the chairs that are present here. These are fairly sensitive HR issues. I have concern about it being open to everybody who's on the Legislative Audit Commission. If we're going to do broad engagement with us as supervisors, then we would request a closed session. And Senator Rest, you're familiar with the
Yes, of
policies,
course.
how you go into closed session. So as we're thinking about that, I also, having been on the Personnel Committee and helped with the draft of harassment policies and the work that I've done on the Rules Committee, I would be much more comfortable if the people in the respective councils took a hard look at what the objectives, I see this as an objectives document or a vision document, and made sure that we were actually following existing or better HR practices. So I would support having our councils bring a proposal that was in light of this, but I will tell you the amount of work it takes to get this number of people into agreement on a new HR policy might tie this up longer than you intend. And so perhaps for incorporating into the document, but also for purposes of making this more efficient, if we could have members from the Legislative Audit Commission from each of the 4 caucuses be the designated point persons to communicate with nonpartisan counsel to get this to a product where we, and Senator Rest, following the Rules Committee process, I
Yes.
think we do need to have it amendable, but I think we need to have counsel assist us in drafting amendments. And so I think I'm lengthening the timeline, not intentionally, but just based on policy experience, and I'd be open to expediting in any way we can do that.
Representative Hanson.
Thank you. And there is no motion on the table, and there was no intent to put a motion on the table. If there was a motion on the table, this would have been posted so that the public could see. And so,
Nobody suggested there was.
and so I want to make sure we're not maybe debating something that isn't in front of us, but we had to start somewhere. There is not a policy right now. Let me just be real clear. There is not a policy right now, and we need a policy. And I think I understand with time that we may not have that policy by November 17th if we're going to do it right. We still have the appointment question in front of us. I'll just say I feel much more comfortable dealing with the appointment if we have policies that are going to be adopted that have annual performance reviews and some type of review. And a 360-degree review, Senator Rest, is a pretty common description of what happens, and often it's done by an independent third party like the Management Analysis Division. But in nomenclature of personnel policies, it's pretty common in terms of, we could define it if we want. I think putting things into statute, if we vote as a commission, I think that would be good too, that there's reviews, because these laws have not been looked at for a very long time. And this has nothing to do with the incumbents that are in these positions, but we have to look at the long run. And I wish we had had something that had been done before. And I've been on this commission for 15 years, and we just have done stuff. So trying to have some standard operating procedures that we have to follow through, I think, is really important. I recognize it's not going to be done in a week. I don't think, so.
Senator Benson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen, and probably not 2 weeks when I look at the iterations we went through just for the Senate budget and how we crafted the language around performance evaluations and the related bonuses. And I'm not trying to drag this out. We need this policy in place. When you called me, if we had started engaging counsel at that time, I think we would have had an editable product in front of us. But, and so I just want to be clear, I do not see the appointments at all linked to this. I think this policy needs to be a priority. It needs to be put in place. But I don't see those two as one dependent on the other.
Mr. Noble's comment?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that you are establishing a policy going forward, and I realize the time frame may constrain that. I just want to emphasize that I look forward to your input. Doesn't have to be, and it's always good to have a formalized process, but I hope we get to some point in the process, and I'm comfortable with a public forum on this, for you to tell me what you think of my performance and whether or not you have ideas or concerns or criticisms. Let's talk about it. This is important. And I will give you, before you make that decision, I hope give that to you probably early next week, my own assessment of the condition of the office, my performance, my challenges, my deficiencies. I will give you some feedback on why I think Ms. Randall ought to be the deputy for the Program Evaluation Division, and Mr. Boozy ought to be the deputy for the Financial Audit Division. These are really important decisions for you to make. And so even though I applaud your efforts, support your efforts to create formal policy, in the realm of informality, we can still have an exchange about how you feel about my performance and the performance of the deputies, the performance of the office, vision for the future, some things that we may need to strengthen or change. So we do have some time to do that, and I welcome that opportunity. If any of you want to meet with me privately, I would welcome that opportunity. If you want to have that discussion publicly, I welcome that opportunity, because these are serious decisions. So Mr. Chairman, I wanted to put that on the record that we're all open to hearing whatever you have to say, positive or negative.
Thank you, Mr. Nobles. And I think, highlighting what Representative Hansen just said, there is no formal structure in place today. You've been here for 15 years. And so this process isn't going to be something that we can whip out very quickly. But I hope in the end that it results in a good structure that we can hand off to, whether we take statutory action on it as well. I think those are all yet to be defined. But I would hope then that we get into a process from a budget perspective, right? We start to define a formal process where we take an active role in the budget discussion, and not only just performance in your organization, but I think you mentioned, one of the key challenges we have are the priorities. Especially in the discretionary side of it, how else can we provide, or, maybe if it's just informational, a process that notification that we're notified or we're more aware of all of those things that you have to contemplate. I think from the public perspective, we chase a lot of headlines, and is that truly what we should be doing? And to provide a formal process so we can take a role in knowing exactly how and why we're moving forward on a discretionary issue that comes up or not. And so I think that's the goal. Today was a good conversation. I guess the only question, if we don't have any other questions, would be, as legal counsel and Mr. Hubinger, does everybody have, based on the conversation today and kind of our outline of our document, does everybody have what they need or a clear understanding of what we're looking for, that you can provide us with some structure and guidance in drafting something that we can take action upon?
Mr. Chair, if we could excuse Ms. Randall and Mr. Boozy and perhaps have Senate counsel.
Thank you,
House counsel.
Jim and staff, Mr. Nobles.
And-
Mr. McCormick, you can.
On the sidelines, Mr. Daughter and Mr. Hubinger and I, Chad, we're ready to follow up. I think one step that we've heard is that we should sit down with the auditor and find out if they have changes that they would recommend in the initial draft. And I think important that the members evaluate the auditor and that the evaluation process is your process. So we're just here to make it work.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Senator Benson, Senator Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo what Mr. McCormick said. I think the chairs need to appoint members from each of the 4 caucuses, because if we try to do this as a committee much larger than that, it's going to be inordinately cumbersome. I would recommend, and I don't know how we're going to get this done by the 7th, but a rough draft for review on the 7th.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Representative Liebling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments I've heard from the members, and especially your comments, Mr. Chair, and, you know, I think this is really important for us to do. I read through the statutory framework, and I'm not finding it now, but I think I had seen in this when I read through it that there's a provision for this commission to meet privately and to be responsible for keeping private information private. And so kind of in following on Senator Benson's comments about, you know, human resources and so on, I mean, I think there might be an opportunity, and maybe our council can take this into consideration as well, whether there might be a role for us to do some of this out of the public eye with the sensitivity of HR, and that it is, I think, authorized for us to do that in the statute. So I just wanted to bring that out.
Both the chair, Rick and I have both discussed that, and as we move forward to define what the next meeting would look like, and there would be a closed portion of that as well, so we can make, to take care of the sensitivities around HR issues. Senator Rest?
We have private conversations all the time, and I have been known on occasion to read the Riot Act to the OLA, but Representative Hanson's been on it for 50 years. 15 years. I've been on it for over 30. I don't think we've made a bad decision in reappointment of a legislative auditor, whether we have a written document or not. And I think we need to keep that in mind. We have not made a mistake in reappointing him or in his initial reappointment. And I think we need to, I do think we need to bear that in mind. And certainly there are occasions for private and closed meetings, but if the subject of those meetings waives the right to privacy, then I think we respect that. And we need to be on the record, because we are responsible to our constituents for the opinions that we express. And if you are unwilling to say in public what you are willing to say in private, then something's amiss. And my disagreeing with the legislative auditor, even on a single word in a document, was made publicly as well as privately, because I thought it was wrong. And I don't mind saying that in a public forum. I don't think it's an HR issue. I just think it's a, response to an action and then responding again. But I think as we're going forward that we don't need to say, well, we've done it wrong all these years, and boy, have we made mistakes in reappointing Jim Nobles. I don't see that as the purpose of this document, and I appreciate Senator Benson's comments that at least at this juncture, for this next appointment, that adopting, whether in statute or in policy or whatever, those two things are not linked, and that the OLA and his staff can give us as much information about how we should go forward in evaluating them as our nonpartisan staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Senator Benson?
Mr. Chair, and I want to echo what Senator Rest has said, but I don't believe prior appointments were in error because there wasn't a system in place. I do want to push back a little bit on being able to go into a closed session. There are sometimes HR issues that have nothing to do with the content of work product, so personality and those sorts of conversations may be difficult to be candid in an open conversation. And so if we're going to take it out of the hands of the chair and the vice chair and move it to a larger group, and let's keep in mind that when we go into closed session, those are still recorded and released after a period of time. So there's nothing secretive about them. It's just an opportunity to be candid in feedback. And so in no way do I intend that there would be secrecy in any of these meetings. And I'm not pushing it. And with all due respect to Mr. Nobles, sometimes the people who are on the receiving end want to be as transparent as possible, but it might not be easy for the evaluator to be that transparent in a tense HR situation. So I'm not saying that we're going to push this. I just want us to be aware that it's not just about the evaluation report. Sometimes it's about the individual in an evaluation circumstance.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Representative Hansen?
I think it's important, based on what we've heard today, you've had discussion that the Senate has changed their personnel policies, that NCSL came in and looked at all the policies. It's almost 2020, folks, and so that's not a judgment on what's happened in the past, but in a lot of the legislative work that I deal with in the environment, we have a saying that prevention is cheaper and better than cleanup. And so preventing problems before they occur, it's better for the employee or the appointee to have a clear understanding of what's coming, what their responsibilities are, how their evaluations will be in the future. And none of us are going to be here forever. And so this is not going to be easy work. It's not easy. It's going to take time and it's going to be harder work because we all have our own personalities, and the personalities are I want to say personalities. All of us have our performance and the performance of the incumbents. So I believe the goal here is to try to get some of this stuff established so that we don't have to start from scratch again 6 years from now, or if there's a vacancy in any of these positions. And, maybe that's after looking at it for a long time. There's not an agenda here of dealing with the appointment, but I just think in 2020, we have to have some type of standard operating procedure that deals with the top appointees of the commission, because we are the appointing authority. It's not the governor, and it's not the speaker, and it's not the majority leader. And so I think the direction was to the nonpartisan staff in consultation with the legislative audit leadership and with 4 members, one of each house, each party, to work with the nonpartisan staff to do that. And in the House, I would appoint Representative Pearson.
So Representative Hansen, so with that then, I would like to nominate or elect Senator Klein, if you're interested, or as a representative.
Mr. Chairman, we have already talked, and we would like me.
Okay, then Senator Rest, awesome. We wanted to get that wrapped up before we go, and then that way we're all set. And and Mr. McCormick, to be clear, you have, even though it may be muddied, clear direction, a broad set of responsibilities. So hopefully we can get an actionable document out in a fairly short time frame, knowing that it's still a draft.
Mr. Chair, yes, we can work on to set up a meeting, whether we can get a meeting or we have to round robin for changes. A couple small points to note. There is nothing in the statute of the legislative auditor that allows you to have a private meeting. There is in the LCCMR, Therefore, our initial analysis in our office was that you could have a private meeting under the general open meeting law that applies to the legislature. Under that law, we would recommend that you don't have a quorum and that you don't take an action. So therefore, your work on this would be in the nature of a draft for review by a larger group, either this executive committee or the full commission.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. With that, if there's no further comments, I think.
Mr.
Senator
Chair,
Benson?
and Senator Rust, as the appointee from your caucus, you're familiar with the amendment process we use in rules, so I would ask us to consider that we come with an amendable document at some point in time and have notice of amendments. Yes.
Formal.
And that we would work through council for appropriate legal amendments. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Representative Hanson?
And just so to be clear, since Senator Rest, you're not on the executive committee, so then we would not have a quorum of the executive committee if it is the.
Excellent. With that, with no other comments, we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody.